I called the plumber myself. That was my mistake, or maybe it was the best decision I ever made. My son Marcus and his wife Diane had gone to Cancun for 12 days. A second honeymoon, he called it. I was happy for them. Marcus worked hard as a regional sales manager, and he'd been under enormous pressure all year. He deserved a break. I just didn't know that while he was sipping drinks on a beach, my 7-year-old grandson Danny was locked inside a storage room in the basement of their house with nothing but a sleeping bag and a half-empty box of crackers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because nothing about this story makes sense unless you understand what kind of woman Diane is and what kind of father I tried to be when I clearly wasn't watching closely enough. I retired 3 years ago after 31 years as a high school principal in Columbus, Ohio. My youth passed away from a stroke 6 years back, and since then it's been just me in the house we built together on Clover Ridge Road. Marcus is my only child. He was a good boy, quiet, kind, maybe a little too eager to keep the peace. That's always been his weakness. He doesn't like conflict. He'd rather smooth things over than face them head on. I used to think that was just his personality. Now I understand it was something Diane had trained into him over years. Marcus met Diane at a work conference in Chicago about 4 years ago. She was sharp, well-dressed, always said the right things when I was around. She called me Dad from their third date, which I thought was warm at the time. Now it makes my skin crawl. Danny is Marcus's son from his first marriage to a woman named Patricia. Pat and Marcus divorced when Danny was 2. Pat moved to Portland for work, and the custody arrangement gave Marcus primary custody since Pat traveled so frequently. She paid her child support faithfully, a fixed monthly amount, deposited into an educational trust that Ruth and I had set up for Danny before she passed. That trust was for school, medical needs, and nothing else. Not Diane's spa appointments. Not a new leather sectional for the living room. Not a 2-week trip to Mexico. I want to make that clear now, because it matters later. Pat called me every 2 weeks to check on Danny. She was a good mother even from a distance, and Danny adored her. But she trusted Marcus. We all did. The pipe situation started about 2 months before all of this. Marcus mentioned at Sunday dinner that the basement had developed a slow leak somewhere near the utility room. He kept saying he'd get someone out to look at it. Weeks went by. Then more weeks. When Diane announced the Cancun trip, I asked Marcus about the plumber before they left. I'll deal with it when we get back, he said. Marcus, a slow leak becomes a flood. Let me call someone while you're gone. I can be there to let them in. He thought about it for a moment and said, Sure, Dad. Just don't let him poke around too much. The basement's kind of a mess. I didn't think anything of that at the time. They left on a Tuesday morning. I called around and found a plumber named Ray, who could come out Thursday. He was a big, quiet man in his 50s who'd been doing this work for 25 years. He'd fixed my own pipes twice, and I trusted him completely. I met Ray at the house Thursday at 10 in the morning. He came in through the side door. I made us both coffee, and he headed down to the basement. I stayed upstairs going through some paperwork at the kitchen table. I figured I'd be there an hour, maybe 2. Ray was downstairs for about 15 minutes when I heard him come up the stairs slowly. Not the quick, purposeful step of a man who'd found and fixed the problem. Something else. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and he was holding his work cap in both hands, turning it in a circle the way men do when they're trying to figure out how to say something. Mr. Callahan, he said, I need you to come downstairs with me. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that made me put down my pen and stand up immediately. What is it? I'd rather just show you. I followed him down the stairs. The basement was finished on one side, a TV area with a couch and some shelving, and unfinished on the other, where the water heater and utility lines were. Between those two spaces was a short hallway with 2 doors. One was the laundry room. The other was what Marcus had always called the storage room, where they kept holiday decorations and old furniture. Ray stopped in front of the storage room door. I noticed immediately that there was a latch on the outside, a heavy-duty sliding bolt, the kind you'd put on a gate. It was slid open, and the door was cracked maybe 2 inches. When I came down here, Ray said quietly, that bolt was thrown. I only opened it because I heard something inside. I felt something cold move through my chest. I pushed the door open. The room was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. No window. A single bare bulb on the ceiling with a pull string. There was an old card table pushed against one wall, a sleeping bag on the floor, a plastic storage bin with a lid, and Danny. He was sitting in the corner behind the card table with his knees pulled up to his chest, squinting at the sudden light. He was wearing the same clothes he'd been wearing last Sunday when I saw him. His hair was matted. His lips were cracked. There was an empty water bottle next to the sleeping bag, and the box of crackers I mentioned almost gone. He looked at me and said, "Grandpa?" And then he started to cry. I crossed the room in 2 steps and got down on my knees and held him, and I could feel his ribs through his shirt, and I couldn't speak for a long moment because something had broken open inside me that I didn't know how to close. Ray was already on his phone behind me. "I'm calling 911, he said. "Call them," I said. "Please call them." While we waited for the police, I got Danny upstairs, wrapped him in a blanket from the couch, and sat with him at the kitchen table. I gave him water slowly. He wanted to drink fast, but I made him sip. I found some bread in the pantry, and he ate 2 slices before I gently stopped him. I asked him as softly as I could how long he'd been down there. He thought for a moment and said, "Since before they left." "Before your dad and Diane left for the trip?" He nodded. "Did Diane put you in there?" He nodded again, smaller this time. "She said it was my quiet place. She said I had to stay until Daddy got home." "Did your daddy know you were in there?" He looked at the table and didn't answer. That non-answer told me everything. I asked him if anyone had come to check on him. He said Diane's sister had come once the first day and left food. After that, nothing. No one came. He slept. He ate crackers. He counted the ceiling tiles. He'd been in that room for 4 days. Marcus and Diane had 8 days left in Cancun. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers first, then a third, then a woman from Child Protective Services, who arrived about 40 minutes later. Her name was Miss Holloway, and she had the kind of quiet, focused manner that told me she'd seen bad things before and had learned to move through them efficiently. She interviewed Danny in the living room while I sat nearby. The officers were in the basement, photographing the room and the bolt. One of the officers came upstairs and asked me if I knew the parents' location. I gave him Marcus's number and the name of the resort in Cancun. I watched the officer step outside to make the call. I want to tell you that in that moment I felt conflicted, that some part of me was hoping there was an explanation, that maybe Danny had misunderstood something, that Diane had arranged for someone to check on him regularly, and that person had simply failed. I want to tell you, I gave my son the benefit of the doubt, but I had seen the bolt on the outside of that door. Bolts on the outside of doors where children sleep are not there by accident. And Danny had looked at the table when I asked if his father knew. I called Patricia in Portland. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her what I'd found, she made a sound I don't ever want to hear again. She was booked on a flight within the hour. Marcus called me back 45 minutes after the police reached him in Cancun. He sounded confused at first, then defensive. Then, and this is what I will never forgive, he asked if we really needed to involve CPS. "Marcus," I said, "your son was locked in a basement room for 4 days with a box of crackers. He's 7 years old." Silence. "Did you know he was in there?" More silence. And then Diane said it was just for a couple of days. She said her sister would check in. Her sister came once. On day 1, it's day 5. I heard him exhale. "Dad, I'll cut the trip short. You need to do more than that. The police are here. CPS is here. You need to come home, and you need to understand that things are going to be very different when you get here." He and Diane flew back the next morning. I know this because the police told me they'd contacted them. I didn't speak to Marcus again until after he landed. Patricia arrived that evening, and I met her at the hospital where Danny was being checked out. He was malnourished and dehydrated, but otherwise physically okay. He had a small bruise on his left shin that he said was from walking into the card table in the dark. The doctor documented everything. Patricia sat with Danny for 2 hours, while I sat in the waiting room and thought about the 31 years I'd spent in schools, watching for signs of children in trouble, and how I had missed every single one in my own family. Marcus and Diane were met at the airport by police. I didn't arrange that CPS and the officers had taken the case forward on their own, which is exactly what should happen. Diane was taken in for questioning. Marcus was questioned separately. He was not arrested that night, but he was told in very clear terms that he was under investigation for child endangerment and neglect, and that he was not to have unsupervised contact with Danny. I'll be honest with you, part of me hoped Marcus would come to me that night, that he'd come to my door and tell me he hadn't known, or that he'd been manipulated, or that he was sorry in a way that meant something. He didn't come. He went home with Diane. That told me something too. The next several weeks were a legal maze that I navigated with the help of a family attorney named Mr. Whitfield, who had been recommended to me by a colleague. Patricia had her own attorney in Portland. We weren't adversarial, we both wanted the same thing, which was Danny safe and away from that house. The case against Diane was straightforward. She had installed the bolt receipts from the hardware store were found on her phone purchased 3 weeks before the trip. She had told her sister one check-in visit was sufficient. She had not arranged for food beyond the crackers. She had, investigators found, used Danny's educational trust funds, the ones Patricia contributed to faithfully, to partially finance the Cancun trip. Not a large amount, but enough. Enough to show exactly what she thought Danny was worth. Marcus's situation was more complicated. His attorney argued that he hadn't known the full extent of what Diane had planned, that he'd believed it was a short arrangement a day or two, with family checking in regularly, that he trusted his wife. The evidence suggested this was partially true. Marcus knew Danny was staying home while they traveled. He did not, his attorney claimed, know about the bolt or the duration. I testified at the hearing. I told them what I had found when I walked into that basement. I told them what Danny had said to me at the kitchen table. I told them about the water bottle and the crackers and my grandson's cracked lips and the way he'd said my name from the corner of that room. I told them that Danny was a child who deserved to be protected and that the adults responsible for protecting him had failed him, some through cruelty and some through the kind of willful ignorance that is its own form of negligence. The judge was a woman named Judge Patricia Harmon. She had gray hair pulled back and reading glasses she looked over rather than through. She listened to everything. Diane was convicted on 2 counts of child endangerment and 1 count of misappropriation of a minor's trust funds. She was sentenced to 18 months and ordered to repay every dollar taken from that trust with interest. She would have no contact with Danny. Marcus received a suspended sentence and was placed on 2 years of probation. He was required to complete a parenting course and undergo family counseling. His custody arrangement was suspended pending evaluation. He was allowed supervised visits once a week at a neutral location. He called me the night after sentencing and cried on the phone for 20 minutes. He kept saying he was sorry. I listened. I told him I loved him. I told him that love and forgiveness were not the same thing as trust, and that trust would take time, and that the person who most needed his apology was not me. Patricia was granted primary physical custody with a plan to relocate to Columbus so Danny could maintain connections here. She and I have spoken more in these past 4 months than in the entire time she and Marcus were married. She is a good woman. She was a mother doing her best from a distance, and she deserved better information than she had. We both did. Danny is in 2nd grade now at a school 2 miles from Patricia's new apartment. His teacher told Patricia last month that he is one of the most curious children in the class, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things work. He has started sleeping with the light on, which the counselor says is normal and will likely pass with time. He still calls me every Sunday. Last month he called and asked if I could come to his school's Grandparents' Day. I said of course I would. He paused for a moment and then said, "Grandpa, can you sit in the front row so I can see you?" I told him I would sit wherever he needed me. There is something I've thought about every day since Ray the plumber called me down those stairs. Marcus had asked me before he left not to let the plumber poke around too much. He said the basement was a mess. I had assumed he meant clutter, boxes, the ordinary chaos of a busy household. What he meant, what I believe some part of him knew, was that there was a door down there with a bolt on the outside and a little boy behind it, and he didn't want anyone to look too closely. He handed me the keys to the house. He asked me to let the plumber in, and in doing so, he led me directly to the one thing that would break everything open. I don't know if that was guilt working through him in some way he couldn't consciously access. I don't know if it was chance. I've thought about it enough that I've stopped trying to decide. What I know is that a man named Ray came down to fix a pipe, heard something behind a locked door, and walked upstairs to find me. And I was there. I was there because I pushed my son to let me help. Because I didn't let him wave the problem away until he got back from vacation. Because Ruth always said, I never let a small thing stay small if fixing it was in my power. She was right about that. She was right about a lot of things. Danny is okay. He is more than okay. He asks questions and sleeps with the light on and calls me on Sundays and wants me in the front row. That is enough. That is more than enough. And if you are a grandparent watching this, or an aunt or uncle, or a neighbor who has a feeling in the back of your mind that something isn't right, Please don't wait. Don't assume someone else is checking. Don't accept it's fine from someone who has every reason to tell you it's fine. Go look. Ask the question. Make the call. The bolt on that door wasn't hidden. I just hadn't gone downstairs yet. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how things unfold, not by accident, not by luck, but by the quiet accumulation of choices that people make every single day. Diane made her choices. Marcus made his. And in the end, every one of those choices came back to find them. The way water always finds the lowest point in a room. That's not a comforting thought. It's just a true one. Diane chose to install a bolt on the outside of a door where a child slept. She chose to take money set aside for Danny's education and spend it on a beach vacation. She chose cruelty not once, in a moment of anger, but repeatedly, with planning and with hardware store receipts. That kind of cruelty doesn't happen in a vacuum. It grows slowly in a house where no one asks hard questions, where everyone agrees to look away, where keeping the peace becomes more important than protecting the vulnerable. She was not caught by bad luck. She was caught because she had built something that could not hold, and eventually, all things that cannot hold will fall. Marcus's failure was different, and in some ways harder for me to sit with. He is my son. I know where his softness comes from, and I know how it was shaped. But intelligence without courage is just a tool left in a drawer. He knew enough to be uneasy. He knew enough to tell me not to let the plumber look around too much. He chose not to know the rest, because knowing would have required him to act, and acting would have required something from him he wasn't willing to give. That is a failure of character, and character is not fixed at birth. It is built or neglected, year by year, decision by decision. What I want anyone watching this to take from Danny's story is not simply that bad people get caught. That is too small a lesson for what he survived. The real lesson is about what happens when good people go quiet. When we choose comfort over confrontation, when we tell ourselves that someone else is handling it, that it's probably fine, that we don't want to cause trouble in a family that's already complicated. I was guilty of that too. I saw signs I didn't press on. I accepted reassurances I should have questioned. I let months go by telling myself Marcus was a grown man who could manage his own household. That was not wisdom. That was avoidance wearing the costume of respect. What changed everything was not a dramatic act of heroism. It was a persistent one. I pushed my son to let me help before he left. I followed through on a phone call about a leaking pipe. I showed up, and a man named Ray, who had no connection to any of us, heard something behind a closed door and walked upstairs, instead of pretending he hadn't. Small acts of follow-through. That is what saved Danny. If there is anything worth carrying out of this story, it is that moral courage rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with certainty or a clear script. It arrives as a small, uncomfortable nudge that says, go look, ask the question, make the call. The people who act on that nudge, even when it's inconvenient, even when they're not sure, are the ones who make a difference in the lives of children who have no one else in their corner. Danny's in second grade. He calls me on Sundays. He wants me in the front row. I intend to be there every single time.